voices of parents are lost in this conversation. How much confidence, how little confidence do you have in what Michael Gove, when he was Education Secretary, used to call or describe as the blob, that institutional mass of teachers and people within academia, to actually make sure we get teaching again? Or do you think there'll be some maybe thinking, well, let's scrub this term early for an early Christmas?
Yeah, I think sadly that's the case. I think unfortunately the fallout from this has been that for some children now, I know my own daughter's at secondary school, and Oak Academy lessons are now part of, the daily life because they're there. So, the teaching just isn't to the same standard as it was before. And that might be because people aren't at school or teachers are away, but that's okay now. And I think, we're not engaging with children in the way that they need to be. I mean, we know that the amount of time they spent on screens during lockdown when schools were closed was highly detrimental to them. And yet we're actually continuing with some of those practices now rather than trying to reverse them and going back to engaging and interacting with them. And I think it's really difficult for children now because school has become something that actually some days they have to go and some days they're not allowed to go, and they just don't know where they are.
Christine Brett, we appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, the RAF tells TV presenters they should stop using words like airman and start using words like aviator.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Pretty chilly out there today, but tomorrow temperatures will be quite a bit higher. However, it is going to be a fairly grey Tuesday and there'll be rain and drizzle in places as well. But it has turned milder across the northwest already thanks to this warm front tucked in here, some warmer air that is slowly spreading its way southwards. Before it arrives though, with clearer skies, we could see a touch of frost across the southeast until temperatures rise through the night as the cloud moves in, making for a misty, murky kind of night. And at times it'll be quite windy, particularly in the far northeast, although the wind's easing here a little as we head towards dawn. Temperatures, as I say, on the rise, so although close to freezing in some spots this evening, by morning we're up at 8, 9, 10 Celsius. So it's a much milder start, but it's a pretty grey day. Rain and drizzle on and off across Scotland throughout tomorrow and for much of Northern Ireland, northwest England. Some patchy rain at times across eastern England, but much of the south, I suspect, will be dry but fairly drab. Temperatures will be quite a bit higher than today's values. Still fairly chilly across Shetland, but elsewhere doubled figures, maybe 13 Celsius. But more wet weather will pep up through the afternoon and evening for Northern Ireland and then across Scotland. Quite a wet evening. A band of rain will swing across England and Wales. That could be quite lively for a time as well as the winds start to pick up once more, so turning blustery and also colder for Wednesday. We should see a return of some sunshine, but there will be showers across all areas, those showers turning wintry across northern Scotland, so some snow here, mostly over hills, but some to lower levels later in the day, and the winds picking up once more. Temperatures on Wednesday back down to single figures, and add on that wind, it will feel a lot colder. So things fluctuating quite a bit this week. Thursday looks like being a cold day, but with some sunshine before the potential for more wetter weather comes in during Friday and Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show FARAGE, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on FARAGE.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, earlier this year, to some fanfare actually, Britain signed a defence pact with the United States and Australia, you'll remember it. Today, Britain signed another sort of defence deal and hardly anyone noticed. But don't be fooled by the lack of any hullabaloo. This deal may prove vitally important to our future security. It's a 10-year-long deal between the UK and Israel. It will see both countries working together on defence and cyber security, to name but two areas. The Memorandum of Understanding, it was signed by Liz Truss, our Foreign Secretary, and her Israeli counterpart, commits both countries to, quote, work night and day to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. However, it may be too late on that count. Reports suggest Iran may be weeks away from having a working nuke. Let's turn to Jake Wallace-Simons, who's reported on the Middle East for years, many years, and is now Deputy Editor at the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, thanks for coming in, appreciate it. How big a deal is this?
I think it is a really big deal. I mean, we've had, for a long, long time, Britain and Israel have been collaborating, cooperating in terms of defence mainly, joint military action, various different memorandums of understanding and so forth. Israeli technology firms provide a lot of our kit, drone kit in particular. We provide some of theirs. And I think that there's a lot of, there are shared values that we have between our two countries, but also, Israel really is the world leader in all kinds of forms of technology. It's the number one country in the world in terms of the amount of unicorns that it has, which is, $1 billion startup. And so it has a lot to offer the UK. And I think that us signing this deal with Israel really is very, very positive for both of our futures.
And particularly on the counter-terrorist stuff, I mean, not so much the drone stuff, but that ability to eavesdrop digitally, electronically on particularly on increasingly encrypted websites. That's, if you are breaking a terror cell up, if you're looking to listen in to make sure that maybe the one individual you've got eyes on isn't communicating with other people, that cyber stuff becomes really important.
I think so. I mean, in a way, Britain is the only liberal democracy in the world that's under constant military threat on any border, whereas let alone, 2 or 3 borders that Israel is vulnerable to. And so I think that it provides an object lesson in how a liberal democracy deals with such a constant attritional threat, terror threat, asymmetric warfare, traditional warfare as well, of course. And so I think that in a way it's the leader in terms of the sort of challenges that it has faced are ones that we would be seeking to be prepared for as well. And so the technology that it comes up with, the solutions that it comes up with, the sort of rules of engagement that Israel uses, which are seeking to retain humanitarian values while still being an effective fighting force against an enemy which embeds itself within civilian populations, etc., are ones that we want to be able to deal with as well. And so we have a lot to learn from the Israelis because we share values and they have much more of a threat than we do. So in order for us to be prepared for the same threat that they face, we need to get on side with them and understand what lessons can they teach us and what kit can we share with them to prepare us for the future as well.
Jake, is there a Brexit dimension to this story, do you think? Is this a deal that could have been signed if Britain was still part of the European Union? Because there are states within Europe, governments within Europe, that hold their nose when it comes to dealing with Israel as a state actor. Could this have been done before?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think that generally speaking, Brexit has allowed us to have a more independent foreign policy. I mean, we've always had an independent foreign policy, don't get me wrong. We haven't been wedded to the EU on that score, for decades. But Brexit takes us a little bit further out of the influence of the EU when it comes to foreign policy. And, the EU is not known for its love of Israel, shall we say. And individual EU countries have been quite hostile towards it and influence the general feeling in the EU towards Israel. Whereas we are free to be much more positive towards, the only Western liberal democracy, Western-style liberal democracy in the Middle East. I've just come from number 10, where Boris gave a speech alongside the Israeli foreign minister, who will become the prime minister in a couple of years' time. And the sort of warmth that Boris expressed towards Israel was very, very significant indeed. And we've seen that from Liz Truss again today. And these are the sorts of words that you can't really imagine another European Union leader saying. So I think, in a way, Brexit has freed us to some extent to be able to forge ahead with the alliances that benefit our country and that uphold our values without being held to this sort of slightly politically correct, kind of soft lefty tone that tends to dominate the EU thinking.
We've talked before on this news channel about the number of British Jews who feel uncomfortable now in the UK because of rising anti-Semitism. So much so, in fact, some of them have gone to Israel to live. I wonder, I mentioned in my introduction there about the words about Iran and the threat posed by Iran's nuclear ambitions. I remember travelling through Tehran years ago and seeing on the side of a building this giant Star of David with a mushroom cloud behind it, and they've been left in no doubt about how Tehran feels about Israel. Those people who've left the UK, moved to Israel, are people in Israel now, and have they been for some time, thinking this is not a safe place to be? It never has been particularly, but because of what's happening with that nuclear program in Iran, is the calculation changing?
I think that the way that people think in Israel is rather different to the way that we think here, because people are much more familiar with, war and violence and terror. I noticed it. I was in Israel not long after the last conflict in May, perhaps a month or 6 weeks after the conflict, and it was extraordinary how the conflict just felt like it had passed into the distant memory already, because 6 weeks is such a long time there. People just sort of crack on and get on with their lives, and there's no sense in which people in Israel are going to be cowed by terror or by rockets or by external threats of any sort. So I think that the things that might terrify us here, not having been hardened over generations by being under direct threat, since the Second World War, really, we've been living without that kind of threat. I think in Israel, in the culture, is a sort of defiance that, they're used to it. Most of them serve in the army. They're used to putting up with threat, and you know what? They're just going to carry on.
Jake Wallace-Simons, appreciate you coming in, Jake. Thanks a lot. Now, the head of the Royal Air Force confirmed today that gender-specific titles no longer have a place in his service. Air Chief Marshal Sir Mike Wigston said that since 1 in 5 recruits to the Air Force were now women, words like airman were no longer appropriate. Well, in the US, moves towards making the military more politically correct have recently gone down really quite badly. Ideas like pregnancy flying suits for combat pilots reveal, it's claimed, a defence establishment keener on diversity than on fighting and killing enemies.
You want toxic masculinity. You want tough men. You want tough women. Because guess what? It's the toughest job in the world. Ask the members of 2-Para who served in Afghanistan. Ask anybody who's fought in Iraq. You don't want sensitive individuals who are thinking about the environment. You want people who are as tough as nails, know how to locate the enemy and kill them. And sorry, that's not woke, but that's national security. National security isn't woke. It's about protecting the nation. And you know what? Warriors aren't politically correct.
Well, that was last week when I was discussing this with the former Donald Trump advisor, Sebastian Gorky. You just saw him there. Well, the RAF's decision to replace words like airmen and airwomen with gender-neutral words like aviator, it was announced in an official RAF magazine. It reads, I think a little passive-aggressively, actually. It reads like this. By the way, if that's the first time you've heard the term aviator, then get on board. No longer does it mean just air crew, but the term aviator has now replaced the generic term of airman to bring right up to date the way we describe or should describe all of our personnel in a modern and appropriate manner. So it's no longer soldiers, sailors and airmen, but soldiers, sailors and aviators. Watch out for TV commentators getting used to that. All that's in quotes. That's what was said in the magazine. Joining us now, the former Conservative MP and retired Army Colonel Patrick Mercer. Patrick Mercer, thanks so much for your time. Is this a development and a trend that bothers you?
Yeah, I think it is, Colin. First of all, thanks very much for having me on. It worries me very much indeed. I was a soldier, but I worked extensively with the Royal Air Force, and it was always noticeable to me that whilst the Army and the Navy continued to talk about guardsmen and about stokers and the rest of it, the Royal Air Force already had the titles, the ranks of airman and airwoman. Now, that was something which might have sounded a little clumsy at first, but you got very, very used to it. the fact remains that those titles have been all part of the DNA of the Royal Air Force. They've been part of their history since 1st of April 1918, I believe, when it was formed. So why do we need to replace them? If the Army said, well, we're not going to have guardsmen, we're going to have guardsmen and guardswomen or guardees or something like that, well, I would still oppose it, but I would follow the logic of it. The Royal Air Force are already there with airmen and airwomen. Aviators, I'm sorry, I don't agree with the Air Vice or the Chief of the Air Staff, I do beg your pardon. Aviator sounds to me like someone that takes to the air. And the majority of the Royal Air Force, for perfectly good reasons, do not fly.
Do you think within this, I mean, I have no idea what's happening at the MOD, what the internal politics are, but I note that the person who's announced this, ultimately the head of the RAF, recently was talking about the target of being carbon neutral in the RAF by 2040. I mean, there's a sense in which you can maybe make a few headlines, create a few headlines by grasping the nettle of political correctness or going green.
Yeah, this is just wokery. They're trying to out-woke one another, the Royal Navy, the Army and the Royal Air Force. I'm sure they'll be dropping the titles Royal fairly shortly. Your last speaker, I thought, made the point extremely well. Warfare is tough. Warfare is difficult, and warfare is about killing people and not getting killed yourself. That's why our airmen, women, stokers, riflemen, grenadier, guardsmen, whatever, that's why they draw their pay. It's not about worrying about the next cartridge, whether the next cartridge that you fire is going to be carbon neutral. It's not, worrying about the blood that you spill is going to contaminate the atmosphere somehow. It's about getting on with the job and completely ignoring the woke nonsense which seems to be infecting the whole of our society and, sadly, our armed forces.
As in many things, America seems further down the evolutionary track on this one too. And what's happening to their military is really exciting a lot of commentary, a lot of it negative. And in particular, this idea that, well, you mentioned the esprit de corps and the camaraderie that the armed forces need. And if you're constantly lecturing people about white privilege and white fragility, critical race theory, all that stuff, then there's partly a function of that is that you spend less time doing the stuff you should be doing. You're spending time being lectured at in a classroom rather than training to do other things like killing people on behalf of the defence of your realm. And there is that aspect too, which is you are potentially just setting up one soldier against another. They stop looking at each other as comrades and colleagues and men and women they're prepared to fight and die for, but as people who are defined by the colour of their skin, by identity politics.
I'm not sure I completely agree with you on this, Colin. I think the United States forces were a pretty good bastion of common sense and non-wokery when certainly the British forces were moving very much in front of them with all of this sort of nonsense. That really has pertained, I think, in the US forces until the handover from Donald Trump to Mr. Biden. And now suddenly they're trying to catch up. Now, I'm not sure whether this is an urban rumour, whether it's just a myth or not, but I was told that during the crucial run-up to the disgraceful scuttling out of Afghanistan recently, that actually the US Army had spent more time worrying about Pride Week than it had about preparing for the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, if that's true, that says it all. Our priorities are completely wrong. We need to get on with defending and, if necessary, killing, not worrying about how many earrings a soldier, sailor or airman can wear in the future.
And Patrick, just before we let you go, just on the sort of green dimension to this, I was talking last week to Sebastian Gorka, former Donald Trump advisor, about this specific point, because the argument cuts both ways, doesn't it? So there are occasions when going green is helpful. I mean, if you have the example we cited last week was a reconnaissance vehicle. If it's got an electric engine, it may be stealthier. So it doesn't always follow that just by being green makes you less combat effective. But you're certainly going to find yourself facing enemies who will be less scrupulous about what powers their tanks, their ships, their planes.
I've spent in the past quite a lot of time in Russia, Colin. And if you look at their armed forces, they're a country with a much smaller GDP than we have and much, much larger armed forces. There's absolutely no place for wokery inside their armed forces. They concentrate on one thing and one thing only, and that is defending their country and, if necessary, fighting and dying. Now, I don't know what their attitude is towards green issues, but all I would say is that if we are wasting our time concentrating on that sort of stuff, then our potential enemies, not saying that Russia is necessarily an enemy, but our potential enemies, believe me, are not even giving it a second's thought.
Patrick Mercer, really good to talk to you. Thanks very much. After the break, Prince Charles is in Barbados as the country removes the Queen as its head of state. Could more countries yet become republics?
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, has the UK overreacted to Omicron? We'll look at the evidence and debate with Oxford expert Carl Hennigan in The Clash before getting positive Professor Carol Sikora's verdict. Then GB News star Neil Oliver advises how to deal with new restrictions without losing your mind. Plus, campaigner Liz Cole on the return of COVID paranoia in schools. And I'll break down the top headlines with my superstar panel. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show FARAGE, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on FARAGE.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, now, 24 years ago, Prince Charles stood on the harbour side in Hong Kong under a tropical monsoon and said all the right things as Britain bid goodbye to its former colonial possession. And in a few hours' time, the Prince of Wales will go through a similar ceremony as the Crown says farewell to Barbados, ending a relationship between the island and royal family that dates back almost 400 years. At midnight local time, 4 in the morning here, the Queen will stop being the head of state in Barbados. Given her recent health scare, she can't be there in person, so Charles is. Barbados has been independent for more than 50 years, but tonight's ceremony in Bridgetown will see it become a republic. Other Caribbean nations plan to do the same soon. Well, joining me now, the royal commentator and writer, Angela Levin. Angela, thanks so much for coming. I know we're going to be talking about the documentary involving Harry and William in a moment, but this, in a sense, is of constitutional and historic importance, what's happening in Barbados.
Yes.
It must be a strange thing for Charles to go through, because he knows that when he becomes king, there's a worry there will be a run of countries that ditch him as head of state. And there he is looking around thinking, this is how it looks.
Yes, but I think they've all so far wanted to stay within the Commonwealth. So it'll become a different type of grouping, but they've given him rights to go anywhere in the city. They've called him this evening as a very special guest. And so they've tried not to, they're not humiliating him at all. They're not doing one-upmanship. And I think you might have a different Commonwealth, but it will still be countries who want to stay together as part of a bigger operation, I think.
It's interesting, there was one of the Sunday newspapers, maybe it was the Saturday Telegraph, I can't remember, but making the point at the weekend anyway, that the Commonwealth, for a lot of people, it just seems this irrelevance. But not so. The Chinese are targeting Commonwealth countries to pump money into. So this soft power that we get through the Commonwealth, we know how much the Commonwealth means to the Queen, don't we? It still matters as an institution.
Yes, well, apparently China has already spent 500 million and they've done lots of roads and they've given them a cricket pitch and things like that, which they're absolutely delighted by. And that compares not entirely, absolutely, but interestingly, that Prince Charles had saved 2,000 young individuals who have been sleeping on the street to help find work and accommodation. And that's from the Prince's Trust. So his is much more emotional and caring than China, which will want to erode democracy, without a doubt, I think.
Money talks, doesn't it? Money does talk. Should we spool on to the second part of this documentary, this BBC documentary? There's a suggestion, well, all kinds of suggestions, but the most damaging one from the monarchist's perspective is what Prince Charles may or may not have said. Do you want to go there?
Yes, well, it's sort of that claiming that somebody within the royal family, somebody senior, has said that has been racist and wondered what the skin tone would be. But if we go back to the Oprah Winfrey interview, Meghan, who was there before Harry in talking, of course, because she must go first, she was talking all about it and she was saying it's been terrible, it's gone on and on. And then Harry came in and Oprah asked him. He looked astonished and he said, oh, well, it was only once and it was before we were married. So you have a different perspective on that. And the second thing is that Prince Charles is not a racist. He's absolutely not. He's wanted very much to become the next chief of the Commonwealth, for example, and he hoped the Queen would give this to him, and she did 3 years ago. So he loves the Commonwealth, he's fond of it. He wouldn't if he was a racist, because it would be quite wrong for him.
He was ridiculed for years, wasn't he, as this sort of avid multiculturalist, the man who said, when I become the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, I will be governor of all faiths, or for all faiths, not just the Church of England. So, he was woke before it was fashionable in some respects. It does seem odd. However, it's so potentially damaging to people who don't have a particularly strong opinion about the royal family, younger people in particular. Again, story at the weekend in one of the papers, talking about young people being given lessons about the royal family and particularly about Meghan and the discrimination, in quotes, she faced from the royal family. So people who know the story inside out, like you, know it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Some people think there's no smoke without fire, and that's a problem.
Well, it is a problem. That's why they've got their lawyers very unusually waiting. But also there's this book that's coming out in America which says that he was guilty because he said when he was having breakfast with Camilla, I wonder what their complexions will be like. Now, that strikes me as being absolute nonsense. One is they have very different timetables. They're not necessarily going to have breakfast together. Two, do you think Camilla would leak that to say what he'd done? Who else was there while they were having breakfast? I can't imagine a member of staff would do that. And in any case, he did it, allegedly, on the day that they were engaged, which is a very odd thing to do. You wait till somebody's married, you don't start anticipating what their children are going to look like. And in any case, he absolutely couldn't care. It's not a masculine thing. I don't like this masculine, feminine, but it's not really a man's thing that the first thing he would think of when they got engaged is, I wonder what colour their complexion will be. And even, which I think absolutely was not the case, but even if he did say something, it could be, said, I wonder if the child would have Harry's red hair. It doesn't mean that you're racist if you actually ask about a child that's not yet born, not yet conceived. This was much discussed at the time,
Angela, wasn't it? We interviewed several people on this news channel who were, mixed race themselves or were one part of a mixed race relationship, who said this is actually, stop trying to apologise for this. It's a perfectly natural act of curiosity. It doesn't betoken some disgusting racist impulse.
Quite.
It's part of somebody just being curious, as you say, as curious as you would about whether he's, he was going to be tall or whatever.
Small,
any of those
yes.
things that make the birth of a new child so wonderful.
Who is he going to look like? Is that racist? I mean, it just is. It's such a shame that they are so full of bitterness and revenge when they've got actually looking at it so much. A huge house with 16 bathrooms, a child, one of each. They're supposed to love each other. They've got money pouring into them for all sorts of things. And yet there's this terrible bitterness that pervades them, runs through their veins. And I think that's, one, ghastly, and two, pathetically sad.
Angela, thanks for coming in as ever. Thanks a lot. Now, The Simpsons are the latest victim of cancel culture, a Chinese Communist Party style. An episode of the long-running animated comedy, which first aired in 2005, has been purged from screens in Hong Kong. Its removal may have something to do with its content, which sees The Simpsons visit Tiananmen Square, the scene of the infamous and bloody suppression of pro-democracy protests in 1989. Well, the episode in question shows that sign that reads on this site in 1989, nothing happened. Joining me now, Brendan O'Neill of Spiked Online. Brendan, welcome to you. I mean, we know, don't we? We already know the answer to the question, do totalitarian dictatorships have a sense of humour? Of course they don't.
No, absolutely not. And that joke in the Simpsons episode from 2005 was absolutely brilliant. It was a classic Simpsons joke. The whole Simpsons family went to China. They went to Beijing so that Selma, Marge's sister, could adopt a Chinese baby. And they're walking through Tiananmen Square and it says, on this site in 1989, nothing happened. And the great irony now is that Disney Plus, in its streaming service in Hong Kong, has deleted that episode off The Simpsons in order to appease the rulers of Beijing. And so the Disney Plus has done what The Simpsons was ridiculing. It has memory hold a historic event, a cultural artifact. And essentially what it's saying on its streaming service is, on this streaming service in 2005, nothing happened. It's just been completely forgotten about. So for a supposedly woke Western corporation to engage in this CCP style form of cancel culture, I think that's pretty shocking.
In terms of the cost-benefit analysis of the thing, though, I mean, in putting pressure on Disney Plus to ditch this episode, there's always a danger that somebody at Disney, or just somebody who's a great fan of The Simpsons and realises that episode 16 from series 12 is missing a vital episode, there is the danger of the blowback. You end up with, guys like us talking about it in the UK and people elsewhere. For why? Is it really so damaging to the sacredness of the Chinese Communist Party that this silly, this skit should be there embedded within an episode of The Simpsons?
That's the question. Why are authoritarian regimes so touchy, so sensitive? Why can they not take a joke? I mean, that is the fundamental question at stake in this discussion. And, The Simpsons was banned in China for about 10 years, from about 2005, after this episode aired, through to 2014 when they came back. All foreign cartoons were banned, actually, but The Simpsons was clearly a part of that. And, the thing is that it just brings attention, as you say, it's the Streisand effect, the Barbra Streisand effect, as people refer to it, where when you try to crush something or shush a discussion or distract attention from something you don't want people to be talking about, it just attracts more discussion, more debate, more controversy. And that's what's happening in this situation. And in Hong Kong, where Disney Plus has now launched as a streaming service, there are people in Hong Kong who are finding that this episode of The Simpsons is missing. Hong Kong is a fairly restless population. They've been agitating for their democratic rights over the past few years, and they've been brutally suppressed by Beijing. And I'm sure lots of the people of Hong Kong are not impressed by the fact that Disney Plus seems to be conspiring, essentially, with the Chinese regime to deprive the people of Hong Kong of certain cultural content. So it's going to have a huge blowback. People are talking about it, and I think it's going to be egg on the face of Disney Plus.
And do you know what? It's just from the point of view of the apparatchiks and the commissars in Beijing, it's just so naive, Brendan, to do this because, have they learned nothing from history? That late 1980s in Eastern Europe, samizdat texts suppressed. What happens to them? works of literature which weren't always particularly good suddenly had this sort of sacred quality because people knew they were banned. They were on a list of prohibited books. We know how that works, don't we? You end up trying to suppress something and it blows up in your face.
Yeah, and it's such an extreme form of suppression. You know, you will know this, Colin, from your years of reporting. But when I was in China, I've been in China about 3 times. And when you search for Tiananmen Square on search engines online, it just brings up a blank page. I mean, it is the most brutal form of information suppression that you can imagine. It just completely blanks everything out. There is no information at all. And of course, that causes huge blowback. People become curious. People want to know why this is happening. And I'm sure in China itself, there are large numbers of people who are asking questions about this event and are curious about the fact that it's the one thing that you will be completely suppressed if you ever try to raise. So there's a real problem of censorship and authoritarianism in China. Chinese citizens don't have basic rights, but it's pretty shocking for Western corporations, especially those that claim to be so woke and so interested in social justice, to go along with this. And that's a betrayal, I think, of people in China and people in Hong Kong.
Yeah, when they become complicit. Brendan O'Neill, good to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much. Just time to reflect on our Twitter poll tonight, getting quite a bit of reaction from you, in excess of 12,000 votes in a little under, just over an hour, in fact. From tomorrow, you will you will face a fine for not wearing a face mask in shops and on public transport. Well, I mean, it may be one of those things where people are talking tough now, but 2/3 of you say no, I'd rather pay the fine than wear the mask, and 1/3 of you thereabouts say yes, the mask will go back on. These presumably respondents who know they weren't wearing a mask when they legally didn't have to. I'm sure that's a story that's going to be coming up with Dan Wootton. Do stay tuned. He's next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Pretty chilly out there today, but tomorrow temperatures will be quite a bit higher. However, it is going to be a fairly grey Tuesday and there'll be rain and drizzle in places as well. But it has turned milder across the northwest already thanks to this warm front tucked in here, some warmer air that is slowly spreading its way southwards. Before it arrives though, with clearer skies, we could see a touch of frost across the southeast until temperatures rise through the night as the cloud moves in, making for a misty, murky kind of night. And at times it'll be quite windy, particularly in the far northeast, although the wind's easing here a little as we head towards dawn. Temperatures, as I say, on the rise. So although close to freezing in some spots this evening, by morning we're up at 8, 9, 10 Celsius. So it's a much milder start, but it's a pretty grey day. Rain and drizzle on and off across Scotland throughout tomorrow and for much of Northern Ireland, northwest England. Some patchy rain at times across eastern England, but much of the south, I suspect, will be dry but fairly drab. Temperatures will be quite a bit higher than today's values. Still fairly chilly across Shetland, but elsewhere double figures, maybe 13 Celsius. But more wet weather will pep up through the afternoon and evening for Northern Ireland and then across Scotland. Quite a wet evening. A band of rain will swing across England and Wales. That could be quite lively for a time as well as the winds start to pick up once more, so turning blustery and also colder for Wednesday. We should see a return of some sunshine, but there will be showers across all areas, those showers turning wintry across northern Scotland, so some snow here, mostly over hills, but some to lower levels later in the day, and the winds picking up once more. Temperatures on Wednesday back down to single figures, and add on that wind, it will feel a lot colder. So things fluctuating quite a bit this week. Thursday looks like being a cold day, but with some sunshine before the potential for more wetter weather comes in during Friday and Saturday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you.